Greetings everyone, I just wanted to make a quick announcement before the video begins. I was recently featured in a collab of sorts with several other animation YouTubers in which we each talked about a knockoff Disney film in some fashion. I was approached by EyeofSol to make a contribution to the project and happily accepted taking on the reins of Pocahontas. I just wanted to give a special thanks to her for the opportunity to contribute, as well as the others who made an appearance as well. I'll leave a few links at the end of the video just in case you want to check out the full project. And now, without further delay, let's get on to the review.
What I love most about rivers is you can't step in the same river twice. The water's always changing, always flowing.
I'm sure many of you are familiar with the story of Pocahontas, right? Classic tale about a Native American girl who essentially stands up for European settler John Smith right before her father can execute him. I'm sure you know the one. It's been heavily romanticized as a story that has been passed down from generation to generation, with the ultimate rendition of the tale that most probably recognize as Disney's 1995 animated film of the same name. What most people tend to not realize is the true validity of this story. For shortly after the two groups had come into contact, a war known as the First Anglo-Powhatan War broke out, where Pocahontas was taken prisoner and held for ransom. She was never freed and thus forced into converting to Christianity under the name Rebecca, being shipped to England to marry a man by the name of John Rolfe, and dying soon after around the age of 20 or 21 from unknown causes. Where was that in the theatrical film? Yeah, most renditions of the story tend to leave that part out because it isn't the happiest of endings. But it's what really happened according to historians, so there's some free knowledge for you. And while I'm spewing off facts about Pocahontas, would you believe that only a year before the Disney version came out, there was a direct-to-video animated film released purely because the producers wanted to capitalize on the opportunity? Headed by Japanese film director Toshiyuki Hiruma, Pocahontas aims to retell the exact same story as mentioned above in a far less glamorous and more down-to-earth representation. This mid-90s direct-to-video rendition was released under a company known as Jetlag Productions, with distribution of the movie handled by Good Times Entertainment. You might recognize their work from some of their other notable releases, such as Cinderella, The Jungle Book, Sleeping Beauty, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Hercules, and Snow White. I think you're noticing the trend here. This film was definitely made just to capitalize on the Disney hype that was present around the time of release, because let's face it, if it weren't for the Disney version, people probably wouldn't look at this movie on the shelves and feel compelled to buy it. This feels like one of those films in elementary school where your teacher says you're going to be watching Pocahontas in class on Friday and you get really excited all week long because you get to watch a Disney movie in school instead of doing work, and then you hype it up every single day until it's finally time to sit down and watch the film, and then you get really confused and disappointed because it's not what you thought it was going to be, but rather just this cheaper, less exciting version instead. You know the feeling, right? Right. Compared to the Disney version, which is clearly superior, it's suffice to say that this film doesn't even stand a chance by comparison. But when it comes down to it, could this movie at least be deemed passable? Well, let's just give this film a look-see, shall we? I mean, it can't be that bad, right? Let's roll. So our film opens up to this brief little song titled The Land of Pocahontas, which has absolutely no purpose in being here other than the sake of the movie having an apparent theme song that can be placed over the opening and closing credits.
Land of Pocahontas, across the sea, where man and nature live in harmony.
I won't deny that the song got stuck in my head once or twice, but when compared to the events of the rest of the movie and everything that takes place, it just feels so out of place. I guess it's worth noting that this film goes by two different names, Pocahontas and The Adventures of Pocahontas, Indian Princess. Regardless of the fact that this film does not capitalize on that princess title in the slightest, this song is essentially painting a picture as if the new world is her land, and that she's the central figurehead of the area, when in reality that isn't very true in the slightest. This prologue is also accompanied by an opening narration that helps establish the setting and premise for the movie, which would be great and all if we could actually hear it.
The land where Chief Powhatan and his tribe lived was a land of mountains and lush valleys. It was here that the chief's daughter,
Care to speak up?
Played
I can't
the
hear you
child.
over the background music. Yeesh, this is Sonic Adventure 2 levels of bad audio mixing.
He's fast! Hey, it's not his speed. He must be using the Chaos Emerald to warp the shadow.
And so our movie begins with Pocahontas wandering through the woods when she suddenly stumbles upon some newly arrived European explorers whom she refers to as palefaces, which was the term used by Native Americans at the time to refer to the white colonists, so hey, at least the movie gets some credit for being historically accurate. Turns out these Englishmen had just arrived from Great Britain with the hopes to establish a colony, as described in their opening exchange in which they determined their overall plans to construct Jamestown. The two leaders of the colonists, John Smith and his partner Barlow, are introduced during this opening scene, where Pocahontas overhears the discussion and runs back to tell the tribe the news of these strangers' arrival, although not before catching the eye of one of the settlers.
You there, girl! Stay where you are!
Mr. Barlow, you may be good with the men, but you've got some learning to do when it comes to talking to girls.
Never mind the fact that she was like 10. Her escape transitions into the next scene, in which members of the Native American tribe are discussing how they should handle the arrival of these new strangers to their land. Many of the higher-ups are against the idea of allowing the Englishmen to stay and wish to send them back where they came from, but the chief makes other counter-arguments against the idea. Pocahontas' father exclaims that the men should not pay for their mistakes because they simply do not understand their land, nor could they have known that Pocahontas was the chief's daughter. It's small things like this that build Powhatan up to be this greater, more forgiving figure compared to most other followers in the tribe. Tonkanna is one of the biggest advocates for attacking the English colonists and forcing them to return to their own land because he wants to avoid more casualties like the ones that the tribe had sustained in the past. You can pretty much tell right away that he's going to betray the chief's orders later on in the film given the way this scene is handled, and there isn't much that's hiding this fact either. The next day, Pocahontas and what I'm assuming to be her best friend, although to be quite frank I couldn't be bothered to remember her name because she only gets like 5 lines in the entire movie, are out picking berries when they end up getting chased by one of the boys of the tribe pretending to be a paleface, to which Powhatan catches and scolds him for doing so. Like the aforementioned girl, this character ends up becoming pointless in the film after this moment because he becomes pretty much irrelevant until the very end, but more on that when we get there.
What were you doing before that big-bellied bear attacked you?
Picking berries, Father. We'll be back with baskets full of berries.
Yes, lots of baskets.
Yes, lots of baskets. Could that delivery have been any more stilted? Supplies are starting to get low for the Englishmen while hunting game is getting low for the Native Americans, and both sides end up agreeing that the other may have resources that they are willing to trade for, and so the two head out the next morning to reach some sort of agreement. Fast forward a bit to where Pocahontas stumbles across a group of these Englishmen and makes peace with them, which sets up the opportunity for both groups to meet and discuss their next course of action. The Englishmen offer to trade with the natives in exchange for food, but several of the tribe members are not willing to give what they have left because they too do not have enough food to fend for themselves in the winter. As one can most likely assume, this leads to an obvious conflict amongst both sides. And as a result, a small group of the natives, led by Tonkanna, agree to go against the chief's wishes and attack the men while they are leaving. This in turn causes John Smith's second in command, Barlow, to fire a gun right back at one of them, causing a whole slew of problems in the process. All of the Englishmen end up retreating back to their fort with the exception of Smith. Tonkanna and his followers get banished from the tribe by Powhatan and Tawanaka, and Smith is set up to take the blame for the wounded native, leading him to be set up for execution in exchange for the bloodshed. Normally, I would side with the Native Americans in any situation, because if there's one thing my high school history textbooks taught me, it's that the Native Americans always lose. But here, it's technically the natives' fault, or Tonkanna's at least, for starting a conflict in the first place. So I can't necessarily blame Barlow for firing that shot in a fit of retaliation, considering he near got his head split in half by a tomahawk. Powhatan's logic is that Smith needs to be executed in exchange for the wound that one of their tribe members had suffered, but in all honesty that's flawed because not only did Smith not fire the shot, but several witnesses could attest to this. Honestly, the film could have done a much better job at making it look like it was Smith's fault for firing the weapon at one of the tribe members, but that's just me. Cut to some time later where Powhatan explains to Smith that he must take responsibility for his own tribe's actions, and Pocahontas trying to convince them otherwise. As I just explained, the chief refuses to listen because of his obstinance, and she ultimately fails to save his life.
Pocahontas, what's wrong? Father and the council have decided John Smith will die. and there's nothing I can do to save him.
That's all, folks.
Alright, in all reality, everything turns out to be okay. Yes, all hope seems lost seeing that John Smith is going to die and there's nothing that can be done, until that same native girl that Pocahontas was chilling with earlier provides her with a wildly convenient deus ex machina, coming in the form of the law of the tribe. Basically, if Pocahontas claims Smith as her own, she will save him from certain death because nobody could stop her from doing so. What does it mean for one to claim a victim for themselves? I don't know. From what this movie seems to say, he's essentially just forced to remain by Pocahontas' side at all times, and if he attempts to leave the village, he would be killed. But that's all I could really get from it. Next, the second song of the movie plays over a montage of Smith getting along with the village in various activities, such as playing a game of soccer, teaching them new hunting tactics, and telling stories around a fire. This allows even more time to pass within the film, to a point where Tonkana gets fed up with the European settlers taking away their resources and plans an attack on their fort the following day. At the same time that this is going on, it is also discovered that Barlow is now undergoing a grave sickness and fears he may not last throughout the winter, while several of the other colonists are also wishing to return to England so that they may not suffer the same grave fate. Despite their own instincts making them want to leave, Barlow persists that they stay where they are because they have not yet completed the mission the king had set them out to do. Pocahontas receives word from several other tribe members who had been spying on the English fort and wishes that her father would try to make peace with them once again despite their previous misunderstanding. He agrees so long as Tawanaka is on board with the idea, and they along with Smith head over to meet with him, to which they find he has sustained a leg injury. Tawanaka seems to have accepted death until Smith manages to snap his bones right back into place and get him back up on his feet in no time. This action essentially seals their trust, and the next day Powhatan allows Smith to leave the village and return to his people to hopefully prove that the natives can be trustworthy. They do just that, and after a brief scare from Tonkan and his followers, they realize that he has also changed his ways and offers more food as a token of his change of heart. After hearing how Smith saved his father's leg, even he could not keep his cold-hearted attitude towards the Englishmen. The film then ends off with everyone celebrating that the colony of Jamestown could survive throughout the winter, and a closing narration explains that Pocahontas got her wish and had the opportunity to visit England several years later. What the film doesn't mention is her being held hostage for many years, being forced to change religions, and dying shortly after making her trip, as I had mentioned earlier. Shame too, seeing as this ending is historically inaccurate, but hey, this movie was meant to be family friendly, so I can't really blame it for that. This sort of thing happens all the time. So, as a film, how does this knockoff hold up? Well, if I'm being completely honest, it isn't all that exciting. Sure, there's nothing inherently wrong with the movie, aside from reasons as to why it was made and the several unnecessary subplots that come and go as they please. For instance, it's briefly mentioned at one point that Pocahontas hates how hard her father can be on her sometimes, but is that issue ever addressed again in the film after it's brought up? No. The boy that dressed up as a paleface and scared the two girls, who actually goes by the name Nabori, goes unrecognized in the plot because most of his significant actions primarily take place off-screen, aside from when he takes the bullet for Pocahontas halfway through the film. He actually should be credited for being the one responsible for convincing Tonkana that Smith saved his father's leg, which was the cause for his sudden change of heart during the last few moments of the film. This man essentially saves everyone from starting a war, and he barely gets any recognition for it. The film also seems to be rushed a bit with how fast it speeds by some of the significant events. It's essentially trying to cram things taking place over the course of several months into a 40-minute movie. And while that's certainly been done before, it seems a little too disjointed if you ask me. Some of the time I couldn't even tell there was a jump in the time gap until I went back to watch the film for a second viewing, and I was left utterly confused as to how much time had passed since the very start of the movie. If I were to give this a rating, it'd probably be a 5 out of 10. Less than stellar animation, nothing too exciting in terms of conflict or action, and the art style doesn't really seem to stick out in any notable way. It's just a basic retelling of the story of Pocahontas in video form, and aside from the historical inaccuracies and important details left out, that's all there is to it. It goes without saying, but this isn't nearly as exciting of a film as the Disney variation of the same name. I just recommend skipping this one entirely and watching that version instead. Till next time, Shadowstreak signing off.